All right, strap in, everyone, because today we're doing a deep dive. And, well, this one's pretty interesting. It's come directly from you guys, listeners submitted. We're going to be heading back to 2009, getting a little retro with it. We're going to be looking at a collection of blog comments about, you guessed it, chemtrails.
Yeah, we're going full on conspiracy theory today. And these comments come from a really lively online discussion full of personal observations and speculations and some pretty heated debates about those mysterious white trails that we see in the sky.
Okay, so let's back up for a second and set the scene here. We're talking August to October 2009. Anxieties are running pretty high. The H1N1 swine flu pandemic is making headlines. Obama is in his first year as president. The economy is still kind of shaky after that crash.
Yeah, it's important to understand this context, I think. Conspiracy theories often flourish in times of uncertainty and upheaval. When people feel a lack of control or a lack of understanding, they often search for explanations. They search for patterns and meaning, even when those patterns might not actually exist.
So we kind of have the perfect storm brewing here. And in this storm, we meet a cast of characters that are super invested in this whole chemtrail theory. We got Founding Father 1776, the blog's author,
Yeah.
and this whole crew of regular commenters. Sky, Celine, Clark, Dude, Ursa Major, Eric Swan, and Mark. Each one's bringing their own unique perspective to the conversation, fueled by their own observations and interpretations of what they're seeing up in the sky.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me is the level of detail they use to describe these so-called chemtrails. It's really vivid imagery, like Velcro clouds, lumpy oatmeal, even boneless fish.
Boneless fish. Okay, hold on. I'm really intrigued now. It's one thing to talk about unusual cloud formations, but
Yeah.
boneless fish, that's a whole other level of visual.
Right. It really speaks to the power of observation and interpretation. These individuals are looking at the sky, and they're totally convinced that they're seeing something out of the ordinary.
Yeah, and they're not just observing, they're trying to document what they see. They share links to pictures. They debate the best ways to photograph these chemtrails. They even talk about trying to collect physical samples.
That's really interesting. This desire for evidence, even if it's anecdotal or lacking scientific rigor, it highlights a really key aspect of these conspiracy theories, this quest for validation.
They want proof, something tangible to support their claims.
Right.
But it goes beyond just proving the existence of chemtrails. It's about uncovering what they believe is this hidden truth, this agenda being carried out right above their heads.
Exactly. And this is where we start to see the chemtrail theory converge with all these other conspiracy theories that were circulating at the time.
Right, like 9/11 truth, the New World Order, even the Illuminati, they're all woven into the conversation. It's like this complex web of interconnected conspiracies.
For example, Celine, one of the commenters, she posts this link about Obama meeting with world leaders, and she claims that they're all flashing Illuminati hand signals. It might seem like a random tangent, but it illustrates how conspiracy theorists connect these seemingly unrelated events into a larger, more sinister narrative.
So for someone who might not be familiar with the whole Illuminati thing, can you explain what that's all about and why it's relevant to this conversation?
Sure, the Illuminati in conspiracy theory lore is this secret society that's supposedly pulling the strings behind all the world events. They're aiming for global domination. The idea is that they're everywhere, even in like the highest levels of government. And they use subtle symbols and gestures to communicate with each other.
So Celine is seeing these supposed hand signals as evidence that world leaders are part of this secret cabal, which further solidifies her belief in this hidden agenda.
Exactly. It reinforces this whole idea that there's a powerful elite working behind the scenes. They're manipulating events. They're controlling the world.
And that brings us to, I think, the heart of what makes the chemtrail theory so compelling for some people. It taps into this deep-seated distrust of authority, this fear of being controlled.
Absolutely. If the government is secretly spraying something from the sky, it just confirms all their suspicions about hidden agendas and a lack of transparency.
And that's where this gets really interesting. It's not just about what they're seeing in the sky. It's about the underlying anxieties and fears that are fueling these beliefs. And that's what we're going to explore further in the next part of our deep dives. We'll look at those personal stories, the emotional impact, and the actions that stem from these beliefs. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of chemtrail theories. You know, it's crazy how these conversations from over 15 years ago still resonate with anxieties that we see today.
You're absolutely right. While the specific events and concerns may change, that underlying human need to make sense of the world, especially in times of uncertainty, it remains constant.
In the last part, we were talking about how these commenters were like meticulously observing the skies. documenting their findings
Yeah.
and connecting what they saw to this larger web of conspiracy theories. But it's more than just like intellectual curiosity, right?
Exactly. One of the things that really stands out in these comments to me is the raw emotion, the personal stories, and the very real anxieties that these individuals are expressing.
Yeah, like Sky, who's in British Columbia, she's dealing with those wildfires. She talks about suffering from severe fatigue and a weakened immune system. And she attributes these health problems directly to chemtrail exposure.
And Celine, who's in Southern California, she describes feeling this strange tiredness and a sore throat after seeing what she believes are chemtrails in the sky. So these aren't just abstract ideas for them. They're trying to make sense of their own lived experiences.
It's almost like they're looking for an explanation for why they feel the way they do. And the chemtrail theory provides a convenient scapegoat. It's a way to externalize those anxieties and fears.
That's a really important point. It's easy to dismiss these beliefs as irrational or fringe, but we have to remember that behind every conspiracy theory, there are real people with real anxieties who are trying to make sense of a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
And for some, those anxieties lead to some pretty concrete actions. Dude, one of the commenters talks about stockpiling food and water. He's preparing for this doomsday scenario that he believes is imminent. He even goes as far as calculating the exact number of days
Yeah.
until this supposed catastrophe.
This highlights how deeply these beliefs can influence behavior. It's not just about holding an opinion, it's about how that belief shapes your actions and your interactions with the world. So in Dude's case, that fear of chemtrails and this looming apocalypse has led him to take these drastic steps to prepare.
It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe that the world is about to end, you're more likely to withdraw from society's stockpile resources and distrust any information that contradicts your belief.
Exactly. This cycle of withdrawal and reinforcement is a key characteristic of how conspiracy theories can take hold. It's not just about believing something, it's about how those beliefs shape your actions and your interactions with the world. And as you withdraw further into these beliefs, it becomes harder to break free.
There's also this strong sense of urgency in these comments, like a need to warn others, like they've stumbled upon some hidden truth that everyone else is oblivious to.
Yes, Celine repeatedly tries to convince her friends and family about the dangers of chemtrails, even though they largely dismiss her concerns. And this is a common theme in a lot of these conspiracy theory communities, this sense of having special knowledge, of being awake while everyone else is still asleep.
It's like they feel this moral obligation to spread the word,
Yeah.
to save others from this impending doom that only they can see coming. But it also creates this divide, this us versus them mentality. That can be incredibly damaging.
Absolutely. It can strain relationships, lead to social isolation, and make it even harder to have those productive conversations about these topics. When you start from a place of distrust and accusation, it becomes almost impossible to find common ground.
That's interesting that you mentioned productive conversations,
Yeah.
because even within this community of believers, there are disagreements and debates. For example, Dude is absolutely convinced that a major catastrophe is coming on a specific date, October 10th, 2009. And he ties it to the arrival of this mythical planet, Nibiru. He sees it as the culmination of all the other conspiracies, the ultimate proof that the government has been lying all along.
Right, but the other commenters are more skeptical of his claims. Celine, in particular, she pushes back on his doomsday predictions, pointing out that no one knows the date or the hour of any supposed apocalypse. And this internal debate actually reveals something quite interesting about these conspiracy theories. It shows that they're not static or monolithic. They're constantly evolving, they're fluid, and open to interpretation. Even within a community that shares certain core beliefs, there's room for disagreement and debate. They might agree on the existence of chemtrails, but have totally different interpretations of their purpose or the timeline of events.
So it's not as simple as saying all conspiracy theorists believe the same thing. There's nuance, there's debate,
Yeah.
and there's this constant process of reinterpreting information to fit their worldview.
Exactly, and this makes it even more challenging to address. Because you're not dealing with a single unified belief system. It's a constantly shifting landscape of ideas and interpretations.
So we've seen those personal anxieties, that sense of urgency, the attempts to warn others, and the internal debates within this online community. But what does it all mean? What can we learn from these conversations, not just about chemtrails specifically, but about the nature of belief itself?
That's the question we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We're going to step back and look at the psychological factors that contribute to the persistence of these conspiracy theories and the challenges of navigating a world that's increasingly filled with misinformation and competing narratives.
Stay with us. We're going even deeper. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've spent the last two parts really immersing ourselves in these 2009 blog comments about chemtrails. I gotta say, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, it's definitely been eye-opening, to say the least. We've seen how these personal anxieties and this thirst for evidence and a deep distrust of authority all kind of converge in this belief in chemtrails.
And how those beliefs in turn shape behaviors and interactions with the world, sometimes leading to isolation and this feeling of us versus them.
Right. But let's take a step back for a second and look at the bigger picture. What does this conversation reveal about the nature of belief itself? Why do these conspiracy theories, not just chemtrails, but all sorts of things, persist even in the face of contradictory evidence?
That's a great question. And it's one that's been kind of swirling in my mind this whole time. Like, what is it about the human psyche that makes us susceptible to these kinds of narratives?
Well, there are a few key psychological factors at play here. First, we humans have this innate need for certainty, for a sense of order and control in a world that can often feel really chaotic and unpredictable. And conspiracy theories offer this kind of seductive simplicity, a way to explain complex events with a clear cause and effect.
Like those connect the dots puzzles we did as kids. Suddenly, all these seemingly random events fit into this neat and tidy picture.
Exactly. And when those events are things like global pandemics or economic crises or political upheavals, the desire for a simple explanation becomes even stronger.
So in a way, these conspiracy theories, they provide a sense of comfort. Like we understand what's happening, even when the official explanations feel inadequate or untrustworthy.
Precisely. Another factor is confirmation bias, our tendency to seek out and interpret information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. So once someone buys into the chemtrail theory, they're much more likely to notice and remember things that support that belief, while ignoring or dismissing evidence that contradicts it.
It's like when you buy a new car,
Mm.
and suddenly you see that same car everywhere. You're not imagining it. You're just more attuned to it because it's relevant to you now.
Exactly. And the internet has played a huge role in amplifying this effect, creating these echo chambers where people are constantly exposed to information that reinforces their beliefs, and it becomes harder and harder to encounter alternative viewpoints.
This all paints a pretty bleak picture. It seems like we're hardwired to fall for these kinds of narratives,
Yeah.
especially in a world where information overload and uncertainty are like the norm. Is there any way to break free from this cycle?
It's definitely a challenge, but it's not impossible. I think it starts with cultivating those critical thinking skills. Be aware of our own biases, question our assumptions, and evaluate information carefully. Don't just accept something at face value, especially if it's coming from a source that's already aligned with your beliefs. Look for evidence, consider alternative explanations, and be willing to change your mind when presented with new information.
So basically, don't just connect the dots. Question the dots themselves.
Exactly. And remember, critical thinking isn't about being cynical or dismissive. It's about being curious, open-minded, and engaging with information in a thoughtful and discerning way.
It's important to remember, too, that behind every conspiracy theory, there's a person grappling with real fears and anxieties. And instead of dismissing those fears outright, we need to try to understand where they're coming from and engage in a respectful dialogue.
Absolutely. Empathy is key here. Recognize that these beliefs often stem from a genuine desire to understand the world, to make sense of things that feel scary or out of control. Instead of ridiculing or attacking, try to have a conversation that acknowledges those fears and encourages critical thinking.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive. We've gone from observing those mysterious white trails in the sky to exploring the depths of human psychology and the challenges of navigating a world filled with misinformation. Any final thoughts for our listeners as they continue to grapple with these complex issues?
I think the key takeaway here is that we all have a responsibility to be critical thinkers, to be mindful of our biases, and to engage in respectful dialogue even when we disagree. The world is a complex place, and there are no easy answers. But by cultivating curiosity, empathy, and a commitment to seeking the truth, I think we can create a more informed and resilient society.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. It's been a real eye-opener. And to all of you listening, keep those minds open, those questions flowing, and those critical thinking skills sharp. Until next time, happy diving.